The girl named Tess Marshall arrived in Detroit. It was a rainy night. Tess had booked accommodation in advance. Ignoring calls from her boyfriend Marcus, she entered the code into the safe following the check-in instructions from the mobile app, but there was no key inside. Tess tried calling customer support, but no one answered. Tess had no choice but to return to the car. Suddenly she noticed that the lights were on in the house. She rang the doorbell. The door was opened by a guy, who as it turned out also rented the same house. Apparently, there was a mistake at the agency. The guy suggested Tess come in to figure out the situation together. Tess asked him to show his booking confirmation. While he searched for his phone, Tess went to the bathroom to clean herself up. Of course Tess was upset about the situation. The guy showed her his booking confirmation. Looks like it really is an agency mistake. Neither of them knew what to do in such situations. Tess intended to look for another place, but the guy said it wasn't a good idea. This neighborhood is quite dangerous. The guy suggested Tess stay here for the night. She wasn't thrilled about it, but there was no alternative. Finally the guy introduced himself. His name was Keith. Tess called nearby hotels, but there were no available rooms anywhere. Tess realized she had to accept Keith's offer and stay here. Keith was going to give Tess the bedroom while he would sleep on the couch. Tess felt uncomfortable since Keith moved in first, but he behaved like a true gentleman. In the room, Tess found Keith's driver's license and took a picture just in case, then returned it to the owner. After taking a shower, Tess found Keith in the kitchen, offering her a drink. He clearly couldn't sleep. Tess politely declined. Keith didn't mind drinking alone. The bedding was still in the wash, so Tess had to wait. Tess did keep Keith company, but not without a drink. She told him that she came to Detroit for an interview for an assistant documentary director position. Keith in turn shared that he trained lions. Currently he and his team were looking for new locations. Tess relaxed and agreed to have a drink. They chatted for hours, discussing men and women. Tess argued that women are much more careful than men. All in all, Tess and Keith had a pretty enjoyable time. He seemed to be a genuinely good guy who could be trusted. It was unusual for Tess since guys had repeatedly left her with a broken heart. Wishing Tess good night, Keith went to sleep in the living room. During the night, Tess woke up to eerie sounds. The door to her room was open. Concerned, Tess went to check. Keith was apparently having a nightmare and was talking in his sleep, asking for help. Tess woke him up, which he didn't appreciate because she scared him. This time Tess locked her door. In the morning, looking at the time, Tess realized she was already running late. In the living room, Tess found a note from Keith, who had already left. He asked her to leave the key in the safe and wished her luck with the interview. This neighborhood in Detroit looked abandoned, as if no one lived here at all. While Tess waited at a cafe, she looked at Keith's driver's license photo. He seemed quite attractive to her. Finally Tess met Catherine, a documentary director. After the interview, Catherine asked Tess where she stayed. When Catherine heard the address, she advised her to get out of there immediately. Tess didn't take it seriously. She was in euphoria after a successful interview. However, the euphoria didn't last long. When Tess arrived at the house, she was chased by a homeless man who urged her not to go inside. Terrified, Tess ran into the house and managed to lock the door. This incident prompted Tess to quickly pack her things. She called the police, but there were no men available yet, so no one would come. When Tess went down to the basement for toilet paper, the door slammed shut and closed on its own. The worst part was that Tess had left her phone in the room. Tess tried to figure out how to get out, when suddenly she noticed a rope that opened a secret door in the wall. Behind this door was a dark corridor. Of course Tess had no intention of going there. However, boredom and curiosity didn't let her sit still for long, and eventually Tess decided to check what was inside. At the end of the corridor, there was a room. Turning on the light, Tess saw a video camera and a bed with a dirty mattress. It looked like something truly horrible had happened in this place. Tess hurried to get out of here. At that moment Keith arrived. Tess handed him the key through the upper window. Back in the house, Tess told Keith about her horrifying discovery in the basement. Keith calmed her down, thinking she was being dramatic. Tess intended to leave this house immediately, but Keith asked her to wait for him here while he went down to the basement to check if there was really a reason to be concerned. Keith was gone for a long time, and Tess began to worry. Before going down to the basement, she propped the door with a chair to prevent it from slamming shut again. Keith didn't respond. Turning on the flashlight on her phone, Tess returned to that creepy room. Keith was not there. Suddenly Tess discovered that the basement was even deeper than it seemed. She heard Keith's pleas for help. Apparently, he was somewhere below. Despite her fear, Tess descended. Keith kept screaming. In the light of the flashlight, Tess saw many cages. No longer able to contain her emotions, Tess begged Keith to answer her. But he stopped responding. Finally she found Keith, who asked her to be quieter. According to Keith, there was someone else here, and that someone had bitten him. Tess wanted to leave and call the police, but Keith stopped her. He wasn't going to leave until he understood what was happening. At that moment, Keith was attacked by an ugly woman who took his life. Next we see AJ Gilbride, the owner of this house. AJ is an actor who was just fired from a TV series because one of the actresses made serious accusations against him. Learning about it over the phone, AJ was outraged. Now, in addition to being fired, he faces a legal battle. The director had no choice but to terminate AJ's contract before a scandal erupted in the press. Later, AJ met with his financial manager. AJ claimed that the accusations against him were false. He also intends to countersue for defamation. The upcoming trial will have huge financial costs, so the manager advised AJ to sell some of his property. The manager also announced his intention to quit. It looks like that everyone has abandoned AJ. Articles about the incident during filming have already appeared on the internet. Calling his lawyer, AJ learned that the situation was even worse than he thought. His life fell apart in an instant. Upon learning that AJ left the state and is in Michigan, the lawyer said it was a bad decision. Although AJ is not yet arrested, he should not leave the state. However, before returning, AJ wants to get some money. Taking the keys to his house, he came to the abandoned neighborhood of Detroit. It was immediately clear that someone was living in the house. AJ contacted the real estate agency, who claimed that no one had moved into the house for 2 weeks. Having accomplished nothing, AJ met with an old friend in a bar who wanted to hear from him what really happened between him and that actress. AJ didn't deny that he was overly pushy, but according to him, he didn't do anything to Megan that she didn't want. AJ returned home late and left Megan a voicemail with apologies. He is truly sorry if he did something that offended her. In the morning, AJ felt very bad. He decided to go through the belongings of the person who had rented the house earlier. The laptop was password protected, but AJ managed to find out that the owner's name was Tess. AJ suspected that someone was in the basement. However, no one responded. AJ made it clear that he was not afraid of anything in his own house and went down to the basement. Until that moment, AJ had no idea about the existence of the secret door. This discovery was truly shocking for him. AJ walked ahead down the dark corridor and stumbled upon that very room with a video camera. His first move was to search the internet to see if having a basement affects the house's value. Right now, all he cares about is money. Taking a flashlight, AJ returned to the basement to measure the area. It seemed that neither the video camera nor the dirty mattress bothered him. Suddenly, AJ discovered that the basement was much deeper than it seemed. Of course, he descended to measure it and found himself in an even darker corridor. The presence of cages didn't bother him either. Suddenly, AJ noticed a strip of light ahead and heard some sounds. AJ went to check what was going on and saw an old television broadcasting educational materials for inexperienced mothers. Realizing that someone was there, AJ rushed to escape and fell into some pit. Someone closed this pit with a grate. Tess was already here, gesturing to him to behave quietly. Next, the events take us back to 1980. At that time, this Detroit neighborhood was not abandoned. Frank, the owner of this very house, got into his car and drove to the supermarket. He was interested in diapers, wipes and other baby products. The sales consultant congratulated Frank on the upcoming addition to the family. Frank said that his wife would give birth at home, without the help of a midwife. After buying everything he needed, Frank was going to return home. But noticing a woman in the parking lot, he followed her car. This is how Frank found out where she lived. Changing into a plumber's uniform, Frank knocked on the door and said that there were some malfunctions in this area. The woman suspected nothing and let him in. Frank pretended to check the plumbing. In reality, he wanted to look around. After wishing the woman a good day, Frank simply left. Near the house, a neighbor told him that he and his wife were going to move. The neighbor was convinced that in a few years, this neighborhood would turn into a slum. However, Frank had no intention of moving anywhere. There are screams coming from Frank's basement that no one can hear. In the present, Tess tried to calm AJ, explaining that they shouldn't show panic in front of that woman. If they get upset, so will she. AJ doesn't understand what's happening. Suddenly, the woman returned to feed them from a bottle, like babies. Tess already knows for sure that disobedience should not be shown, so she drank the milk. However, AJ found it too repulsive. Tess explained that this woman wants them to be her children. Since AJ flatly refused to drink the milk, the so-called mother descended into the pit. She stroked Tess's head, calling her a baby girl, and then dragged AJ with her. Since the mother forgot to cover the pit with a cage, Tess managed to escape while the mother was feeding AJ like a little child. Hearing AJ's screams, Tess crept toward that very room with the television. Tess realized that she couldn't help AJ now and was going to quietly leave to call the police. However, when Tess stumbled in the corridor, the mother heard the sounds. Tess rushed to the exit, but the door to the basement was locked. Then Tess ran to the window, broke the glass and managed to escape. The vagrant helped her. The mother stretched her arms out of the window. In panic, Tess shouted that there was still a person in the house, but the vagrant, the one who had previously followed her, advised her never to return to this place. According to him, terrible things happen here. If Tess returns here at night, the mother will leave the house and look for her. Meanwhile, AJ, taking advantage of the fact that the mother chased Tess, tried to find a way out. Suddenly frightening sounds were heard. AJ found another room. Meanwhile, Tess, who doesn't have the phone with her, has walked to the nearest gas station. In the room, AJ saw an infirm old man and thought he was another victim of the mother. AJ doesn't know that this is actually Frank, the former owner of the house. Tess called the police and explained that she was kept locked up and that another person was still there. Of course, she didn't have any documents with her. AJ gave Frank some water and said that help would arrive soon. Upon hearing about the police, Frank, who was very weakened, tried to reach for something. Tess led the officers to that house. Of course, she didn't have the keys. The officers refused to break down the door, considering Tess insane, and her story about the grotesque woman in the basement was nonsense. Despite Tess's pleas, the police left. Meanwhile, AJ discovered dozens of videotapes. Breaking the window, Tess returned to the house. There was no help waiting, so she would have to rescue AJ alone. After watching the contents of the tapes, AJ was shocked. He realized that Frank was far from being a victim. At that moment, Frank took a revolver from the bedside table and voluntarily passed away in front of AJ. Tess got into her car, getting ready to meet the mother. When the mother appeared, Tess drove straight at her. This has to end here. Taking the revolver, AJ searched for a way out. He didn't know that Tess had returned to the basement for him. Frightened, AJ fired. Fortunately, the wound was not serious. When Tess and AJ got out, they realized that the mother had disappeared somewhere. Maybe she was still alive. Since Tess's car was wrecked, and AJ lost the keys to his, they had to walk. Tess had to lean on AJ because of her injury. They found shelter in a water tower, where the vagrant named Andre lives. He explained that the mother is Frank's daughter. AJ is going to go get help because Tess is injured, but Andre, who has been living here for over 15 years, advised them not to show themselves until dawn. Suddenly the mother burst into the water tower and attacked Andre, taking his life. AJ and Tess fled. Due to her injury, Tess is moving very slowly. Tess reminded AJ of the revolver, but he accidentally dropped it. The mother cornered them at the top of the water tower. To save his life, AJ pushed Tess down. The mother, who considers her a child, jumped after her, as AJ had hoped. Descending, he realized that Tess was alive. AJ tried to justify himself to her, saying he had no choice. At that moment, the mother regained consciousness and took AJ's life. After that, she gestured for Tess to come back home with her. Instead, Tess took the revolver and fired. In the final scene, we see Tess limping away from this neighborhood. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel not to miss more exciting new products. Also, the authors will be pleased if you leave your opinion in the comments.